This is the HX115 LR from BetaFPV, and it has something on board that, as far as I know, has never been done before in any bind and fly quadcopter. We're going to talk about what that is. And we're going to compare this Toothpick. Is it a toothpick? We're going to compare this Toothpick to what is probably the best performing example of the category, the FPVCycle BabyTooth. I'm Joshua Bardwell, and you're going to learn something today. The BetaFPV HX115 LR that you're seeing me review in this video was sent to me by BetaFPV. I did not purchase it with my own money. I have not received any other money or any other form of compensation in exchange for this video, and none of the content that you see has been pre-approved by anybody other than me. While you take a look at this sample flight footage from the HX115 LR, let me tell you the thing that makes this quadcopter so unique. It is a bind and fly quadcopter with a built-in receiver. Yeah, no, I know there's lots of those, but this receiver is built into the flight controller. Yeah, I know there's lots of those, but all of the tiny whoops and other micro quads out there with receivers built into the flight controller, they're typically like a FreeSky receiver or maybe a Spectrum receiver. They are a old, antiquated, I'm saying it, long-range protocols are the wave of the future. And when you think long-range protocols, you probably are thinking something like Crossfire or Immersion RC Ghost or maybe TBS Tracer, but I'm talking about ExpressLRS. ExpressLRS has similar technology to those other long-range protocols that I talked about, but it is open source, and that means anybody can implement it. And that means that when people said, hey, can you give us a tiny whoop flight controller with Crossfire built in? TBS went, we'll think about it. But when people said, hey, what if we made a tiny whoop flight controller with, or I should say Toothpick flight controller, with ExpressLRS in it, nobody was there to say no. It's open source and anybody can do it. And that means that the crappy range, I'm just going to say it, the crappy range that you usually get from the built-in receivers on this type of quadcopter, it's not a factor with the HX115 LR. Yeah, we're going to do a full flight test with commentary. I'm not just going to show you this fancy footage looking its best, but more importantly, we're going to acknowledge that BetaFPV has done something with the HX115 that people have wanted for a long time and haven't been able to get. If you're like me, then you were probably a little bit confused when you saw me call this an HX115. I actually reviewed the BetaFPV HX115 HD previously on my channel. I loved it, but it was more like a toothpick. In other words, it had this Pure X frame, it had the flight control stack in the middle, the camera on top. It was a toothpick. This HX115 doesn't even have a 115 millimeter wheelbase. It's something like 127, 125 millimeters. And it doesn't have a toothpick style frame. It has a traditional, top plate, bottom plate style frame and a top mounted battery. But hang on, set aside the semantic arguments over what is and isn't a toothpick, because frankly, I kind of like that. I like top-mounted batteries for sort of freestyle-y quads. So maybe there's something to this. Now, you probably can't see this just by looking at the flight controller, but the thing that has never been done before, as far as I know, is that this is a bind and fly quadcopter with a built-in ExpressLRS receiver. So you can see right here at the front of the quadcopter is a little 2.4 gigahertz dipole antenna, and it goes up and it connects right here at the front of the flight controller. The receiver's built in. So when they call this little guy long range, like it comes with 450 milliamp hour 1S batteries. It's not going to fly that long on these batteries. It's long range in the sense that it comes with a long range control link built in. And yeah, they say in the product listing that you can put an 18650 battery tray on top of it and fly it for like 15 minutes. And that may be true, but they don't ship it with the 18650 battery tray in the box. You have to sort of source that yourself and wire it up yourself and install it yourself. The pictures in the listing are a little misleading. You could do that, but most people are probably just going to fly it like this. And that's okay with me because I'm way more interested in fun micro freestyle rippage than I am in long distance. Here's the flight controller that comes with this quadcopter, and it may not be entirely obvious because we're only looking at one side of the flight controller, but this is an all-in-one Toothpick style flight controller. So it is 25 millimeters on a side. On the underside, they've got the ESC, FETs, and controllers. It's a built-in ESC. Here are the motor pads where you solder up the motors, and they are relatively big pads. Some of these all-in-one Toothpick style flight controllers have really, really tiny pads that are difficult to solder to. These will be a little easier, although you're still going to struggle. They're still, I mean, you've got a lot of stuff to put on this board, and it's pretty crammed in. Here we've got some UARTs, TX2 and RX2, and a 5-volt and ground output. And we've got the video transmitter output here. There's VTX, camera, ground, 5 volts, and smart audio. That's going to be a UART TX pad for smart audio. Various other things. Let's see, buzzer. We've got outputs for a buzzer here, buzzer minus and buzzer plus, as well as an additional 5-volt and ground. Here is the output for the ExpressLRS receiver. So as flight controllers go, this is not a super remarkable one in terms of its capabilities. And frankly, it's not super remarkable even in terms of other all-in-one Toothpick style flight controllers, which may have more. How many UARTs do we have here? We've got 2 full UARTs. Rounding out the specs on the HX115, it's got 1102 sized motors in 18,000 kV. The motors do take T-mount props, and although the props do have holes for screws, these are press-on. The motors do not actually have screw holes. Now, 1102 was a size of motor that was commonly used on small toothpicks, so that's not a bad choice. But if we look at the FPVCycle BabyTooth, we can see that the state-of-the-art in toothpick motors has come a long way. These are 1302.75 at 11,000 kV, and yes, they are pushing the same 3-inch props. Kebab has worked a lot to try different sizes of motors and figure out which ones he thinks works the best. So there's nothing wrong with those 1102 motors, but when we get to the flight test, we may see that it's not performing quite at the level that it would if it had a larger motor. Well, we can't talk about motors and props without talking about weight. And if we look at the weight of the BabyTooth, it comes in at 44 grams dry, or with its battery, 58 grams. That's pretty light. If we look at the HX115 LR, it comes in at, I swear that's a coincidence, 44 grams dry and 58 grams, 56 grams, almost the exact same weight. Well, okay. Suffice it to say that coming in at the exact same weight with larger, more powerful motors is going to give this guy a little bit more torque, but they're lower kV motors, so they're probably going to make less RPM and less top-end speed. What about the batteries? The HX115 is paired with this 450 milliamp hour 1S high volt battery. You can see it says 4.35 volts there, so it's intended to be charged past the 4.2 volts that you normally would, and that means that its milliamp hour rating is a little bit bigger, because the more volts you push in there, the more milliamp hours you get out. It does have a BT2.0 connector. I did a comparison of BT2.0 and PH2.0 previously on my channel. I'll put a link to that down in the video description as well. Long story short, I found that BT2.0 does have a significant performance advantage over the PH2.0 connector used on most other 1S batteries. However, FPVCycle doesn't use a PH2.0 connector. They use an XT30, and XT30 is even better. Yes, it's heavier, but on a quad this size, we can afford a gram or two. It's not like a tiny whoop where every gram matters. We can afford an XT30, and it's going to deliver even better performance due to its lower resistance. The main limitation is that 1S batteries with XT30s on them are fairly rare. This GNB 600 milliamp hour pack was sent to me by Kebab, and basically he has them made specifically for him. Almost nobody else uses them, but they should. They perform better. If you do end up getting a bunch of BT 2.0 batteries, you might wonder how you're going to charge them. BetaFPV also sent this 6-bay 1S charger that charges BT 2.0, whether they're tiny watt batteries or whether they're these big 450 milliamp hours, charges up to 6 of them at a time. And it also has PH2.0 connectors here for your traditional tiny watt batteries if you're still switching over. Well, the only thing left to do is to take this guy out and fly it. And before we do that, I got to take it over to the computer and set it up. And there are a couple little quirks in its setup that I think you're going to want to know about. And specifically, you're going to want to change before you fly it. So let's head over to the computer. I'll show you what those are. Now, the first thing I recommend you do is update the firmware on your ExpressLRS receiver, because that is the simplest way to bind an ExpressLRS receiver to an ExpressLRS module. And if the ExpressLRS module and receiver don't have the exact same firmware version on them, and if the options don't match up, then they won't bind or they won't work together right. Now, one way to flash the ExpressLRS receiver on this quad is using Wi-Fi. This is something that most ExpressLRS receivers have built in. You can see I plug in USB. This blinking orange light is the receiver LED, and after about 20 seconds, it begins fast flashing. If it doesn't have a bind after power up, it'll fast flash and enter Wi-Fi mode, and then you can connect to it with your phone or your laptop's Wi-Fi and update the firmware that way. I've got a separate video about how to do that, and I'll link it down in the video description, but that is not what we're going to do here. There's an easier way. So the app we're going to use is ExpressLRS Configurator. It's used to compile and flash firmware on ExpressLRS. There's a link to that in the video description. We're going to select the BetaFPV 2.4 GHz category and the BetaFPV 2400RX receiver. The method we're going to use to flash is Betaflight pass-through, and that means we're going to flash directly through the USB port on the flight controller. Following that, we will leave all the options at default probably, but you do want to set your binding phrase. That's going to be like a Wi-Fi password that you use on all your ExpressLRS gear, and it'll automatically bind. And then when you're done, you'll select your COM port that the flight controller is on, and you'll hit the build and flash button. And then the next thing that'll happen may take like as much as 5 or 10 minutes if it's the first time you've done it, because it has to download a whole bunch of other stuff. But it will compile your firmware, and it will automatically flash it through the USB port on the flight controller. In very rare cases that doesn't work, and you can then you could take that same file and you can flash it via Wi-Fi if you prefer. The next thing you got to do is you have to update the CLI dump on the Betaflight configuration on the quad, because BetaFPV says that the default PIDs that they ship with are effed up. Why'd they ship it that way? I don't know. And I would love to say that if you're watching this at some point in the future, surely they've updated the flight controller to have this configuration from the factory. But I don't think that's true. I think they're going to keep shipping this effed up configuration forever and just rely on you to do this that I'm about to show you to do. CLI dump of the HX115, PID update of the HX115. Yes, that's what we want. This is, where are there two of them? Find the jitter is the updating version, download. Okay, so this is the factory, and here is the updated one. Why? Okay, and is this a complete firmware update? No. So this is just an update to the PIDs. It's not a complete firmware update. Fine. Let's go ahead and just copy paste that. Copy. I'll go into Betaflight configurator. And we will right click paste in the text and hit enter. Great. Here in the configuration tab, we can see that they are not using bidirectional D-Shot. The flight controller comes with a BLHeli-S ESC. It does not support bidirectional D-Shot or RPM filtering out of the box. Whether that's absolutely necessary on a quad this small is certainly debatable. It would be nice to support it. You certainly could flash the Blue Jay or JESC firmware to the ESC if you wanted to, and then theoretically bidirectional D-Shot would work, although I have to point out on some BetaFPV flight controllers it doesn't work because the flight controller can't do it. So we can't be sure there. I like that they ship with the maximum arm angle disabled to let it arm even if it's not perfectly level. Since there's no buzzer on board, I would prefer that they ship with the motor beacons enabled so that if you lose your quadcopter, you can make it beep, 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 make the motors beep, help you find it. We'll save and reboot on that. Here in the Power and Battery tab, there's an important change you're going to need to make if you use high volt batteries. And the BetaFPV batteries that come with the quad are high volt batteries. Betaflight expects the maximum that your battery is going to be 4.3 volts, but high volt batteries go to 4.35. And that means when you plug one of those batteries in, if it's fully charged, Betaflight will mistakenly think it must be a 2-cell battery that is discharged down to around 2 volts. And you'll see in your OSD, you'll see like 2.3 volts. You'll go, wait, I thought I charged these batteries. What's going on here? Well, Betaflight is just misinterpreting how many cells the battery is. The way to fix that is to raise that to a minimum of 4.35, but we could just crank that to give us a little headroom here as a maximum cell voltage. Again, only if you're going to be using high volt batteries. Otherwise, this number is fine. Let's just put that at 4.4 and we'll call it good. Here in the PID tuning tab, we can see their custom PID tune, and we'll do a flight test in just a minute and see how that goes. The rates are lame Betaflight default rates, so let's go ahead and put my good old freestyle rates on there. Here in the receiver tab, you can see I've already got my channels working and I've got my channel map correct. One thing that's really weird about the way they shipped it is they've shipped it with the stick low threshold set to 1,000. I've set my endpoints correctly to 1,000 and 2,000, and that means with a stick low threshold of 1,000, the quadcopter won't arm. It needs to be at least 1,001 if your throttle goes down to 1,000. I normally set this to about 1010 to give me just a little bit of headroom at the bottom of the throttle, but I guess they're relying on the fact that normally when you bind a receiver, the default endpoint is 998. So you can arm at 1,000, but they're not taking into account people like me who actually set their equipment up correctly. It's kind of weird that they ship it with a stick low of 1,000. Now here we can see they ship with the RSSI channel disabled, and you might think that that's incorrect, but Betaflight has the capability to read RSSI and link quality directly from the telemetry of the ExpressLRS system. You do not need to use an RSSI channel. BetaFPV ships with a pretty decent OSD setup. It actually looks a lot similar to how I usually set my OSD up. The camera is a NTSC camera, and they ship it set to auto. It shows PAL. We could just manually set that to NTSC, and then our OSD elements will display correctly. The other thing that I think I would do differently is they ship it with RSSI, DBM enabled, and RSSI. I don't care about RSSI percent. What I usually want to see is RSSI DBM and link quality, or LQ. So I'm going to turn off RSSI and enable LQ. The rest of it, I guess I can leave where it is. By the way, if you're interested in learning more about how to set up your RSSI and LQ thresholds in Betaflight when using ExpressLRS, I've got a video about that. It's linked in the video description. There are a couple more things that you should do so that you can be sure that you're not going to fail safe. But that's a topic for another video, linked down below. Here in the video transmitter tab, I'm very happy to see that the VTX table is set up and ready to go. We can easily change this. I like to use raceband 8. The reason I use raceband 8 is because it is always going to be away from the frequencies used by any nearby Wi-Fi networks and will not get interference from Wi-Fi networks. And the power goes up to 350 milliwatts. Finally, we need to set up flight modes, and BetaFPV ships with a pretty decent setup of sort of default flight modes, but I'm going to go ahead and set it up to match my normal switch configuration, and you'll probably do the same. Or you can set your controller up to match theirs. It's up to you. Well, I'm just about to do the test flight, and I was getting really, really bad video range. I want to show you how I fixed it. I'm not 100% sure that yours will come this way, but just in case. So we're going to go into the Betaflight OSD. We're going to go to Features, VTX, and I had pit mode on, and even when I tried to turn pit mode off, it didn't work. What you need to do is go into Config, and then go into Op mode, and you'll see the Op mode is set to Race. You want to change that to Free or Freestyle. In Race mode, it always powers up. In pit mode, in Free or Freestyle mode, it will power up at full power. And let's just go back and save and exit, or save and reboot. Let's just see if that sticks. Config is free. Okay, great. For the record, it will go out of pit mode as soon as you arm. So you may prefer it to be that way if you want it to stay in pit mode while you wait to arm and not overheat itself. But personally, I just like it to go to full power as soon as I take off, most of the time. Speaking of full power, we are at 350 milliwatts. That's the max power of this video transmitter, and we will see what kind of range we're going to get off of it. ExpressLRS is at 250 milliwatts and 250 hertz. And honestly, as far as ExpressLRS goes, we should have no trouble with the range. We really shouldn't see the LQ drop much at all. As far as the video transmitter goes, flying through that little path behind the barn, that's my sort of gut check for video transmitter power. And if I get through there with very little breakup like that, that is consistent with about a 200 or 350 milliwatts. We could put this guy on the Immersion RC RF power meter and just check the power, but got almost no breakup, pretty clean, so I feel like the video transmitter is offering about what it says it should. Flying slow and smooth like this, I have no complaints. I don't see a ton of like jitter or vibration. The camera looks really nice. This is a really nice analog camera. I love the dynamic range. I love the detail that I can see in the shadows. I tend not to like a super contrasty camera for FPV because a super contrasty camera hides details that you might want to see while you're flying. I think with these little 1S batteries, you really have to fly them down as close to 3.0 as you feel like you can get away with. I would not expect this guy to have enough oomph to be able to tolerate smacking a leaf or smacking a branch. The motors just don't have any torque, not much torque, so if I did hit something, I would expect to fall out of the sky. This is a perfectly, you know, this isn't bad. It's perfectly fun to fly. 3.3 volts. Video transmitter is not the best. 350 milliwatts I feel like we're getting roughly what we could expect from 350 milliwatts. And of course, ExpressLRS LQ is not even thinking about dropping. It's just hanging right in there. Perfectly nice. 3.2 volts. All right, we got about 4 minutes of very gentle flying on this 450 milliamp hour 1S high volt. Now, certainly one of the most fun things about flying a Toothpick is the ability to do some acro and some racing. And I have a real question of how these 1102 motors are going to perform when pushed. Let's just start with a nice full throttle punch. Ready? Watch my throttle in the lower left, by the way. Here we go. So yeah, not a lot of power and not a lot of responsiveness from the throttle. Watch the throttle again. Look how slow it is to punch up. Not a lot of responsiveness. What if we try to do any flippy floppies? A little jiggle. That's really, honestly, not a terrible tune. I mean, if I'm a little gentle on the sticks, no. I was a little gentler on the sticks, and I was able to kind of remove that shutter at the end of the flip manually, but if we try and do some flingy flangs. Well, already I'm getting low battery. Oh, no, there's no weight. Right, that's not this quad's fault. That's just how Toothpicks are. Can we get some speed? That's not the worst ever. I still would love it to have more thrust, honestly. I'm able to kind of push it, but it just doesn't have enough thrust to really feel sharp through the corners, and some of that's due to its lightweight. Just a lightweight quad isn't going to feel like it corners the same, but like I said, flying the 1S Toothpick from FPVCycle, you definitely can get a little better. I don't hate this though. The thing I hate the most is the battery. The battery is already down to 3.4. And we're at 2 minutes flight time. I don't know if this is, I mean, it needs an XT30 to be honest with you. Really needs an XT30. But the battery itself may not be that great either. I'm having fun though. Oh. So that brings us to the end of the video, and as always, the question, should you buy it? And the answer to that question is not an unequivocal yes, but it's not an unequivocal no either. The flight performance of this quadcopter was better than I expected, but nowhere near as good as the flight performance of the FPVCycle BabyTooth. Unfortunately, I can't show you the flight performance of this because I crashed it in a pile of metal shavings in my barn a while back, and the motors are not in stock at FPVCycle, so I haven't been able to replace it. But I'll put a link in the video description to some flight tests I did of this quad, and you can see just how freaking good this little guy flies. This little guy flies better than I thought, but I think it is significantly held back by its tiny 1102 motors. And I ran this past some of the people on my Discord, and one of them said, yeah, I bought this whole quad because I'm a fan of the flight controller, and I'm a fan of the video transmitter, and I'm a real fan of the ExpressLRS, but then I just am going to put some different motors on it. That sounds like a fantastic idea to me. These are the 1302.75 FPVCycle motors. I think a 1202 would probably be fine. 1302 would probably be better. Yeah, I would totally do that. The other big improvement that I think I would make if I were going to fly this quad like on the daily by myself would be to take the BT2.0 off and put an XT30 on and get something like these 600 milliamp hour GMB batteries. They're basically the same weight and size as the 450 BetaFPVs, but they're way, way better quality cells, and the connector is going to give you way, way better performance. So with a little bit of tweaking, this could be a decent quad. The unknown quantity here is the BetaFPV electronics, the flight controller and ESC. BetaFPV products are, at their best, they are average. Like, they still have some failure rate, but that's kind of to be expected for most things in FPV. But at their worst, they are terrible. For example, the BetaFPV light radio, a controller that they make, I knew somebody who bought tens of them for a classroom and said that they had a 100% failure rate. Like, all of them failed. So you never know with any new BetaFPV product what you're going to get in terms of reliability. And that can change from batch to batch too. This first batch is probably good. If you're watching this video 6 months from now, you may be rolling the dice, and there's nothing I can do to make that better for you. The performance of the receiver, though, is exceptional, and I do hope that we see more ExpressLRS receivers built into more products. And I kind of don't want to poo on this product too much, because BetaFPV is the one who did it, who gave us a flight controller with ExpressLRS built in, and I want them to be wildly successful so that more people do it. But I can't promise you that the flight controller is not just going to crap out 2 weeks after or in a crash. Overall, I think the design of this quad is not bad. Camera is great, video transmitter okay, motors a little too small, passable for some people, and frame, I mean, it's kind of wiggly, but that's kind of true of all the frames in this weight class, so you just hope it's not too heavy and you hope the durability holds up. If you've decided that this is a product you're interested in, based on that semi-enthusiastic endorsement, then there are links down in the video description, both to this product and to the flight controller if you want to build your own. And those links are affiliate links. What that means is that when you click that link, then you do your shopping at the store and you check out, I get a small commission off the sale. And it's an easy way for you to support the channel. It doesn't cost you anything. Click the link, do your shopping, check out. I get a little bit of money. I'm also going to put down in the video description a link to my rundown of the ExpressLRS modules that are available today. If you're thinking about getting into ExpressLRS, there are several different modules you could be buying and several different manufacturers making receivers. And I've got a rundown video to help you pick the one that's going to be best for you. I think I know the one that's best, but you watch the video and decide for yourself. All that's down in the video description. Thank you so much for watching. Happy flying. You guys, I don't know where I am, and I don't know what's going to happen, but if I don't make it out of this, I just want to know that you subscribe to my channel, or maybe join my Patreon, or click one of these videos I picked out for you.